First question here on my right.
Spire, do you provide any API so that anyone can make some applications using your API and track some SEEP? Say I have some SEEP, I want to monitor only my one, so I can have some application and track that one.
Okay, so we do have an API. So the question was, does Spire have an API so that individuals can track one or two ships or develop products around it? The answer is yes, we do have an API. It's one of the principal ways that we pass information to our customers. However, for the time being, tracking vessels and supplying vessel location information is what we are paid for. So right now it's not an open database for anybody to just come and track a ship. But we are thinking about moving down that road as well. It would be a slightly different product. And right now we are very much a B2B type of business. But we are thinking of different ways that we could actually open up an API or a database to individuals and developers who want to build things, for themselves or for other people as well.
So dare I say, watch this space. I've been wanting to do that gaggle up.
I've been
Sorry.
wanting to say that since last week.
Yeah. Okay, next, sir in the grey t-shirt.
Hi, my name is Pradeep. This question is either to Mark from Spire or to Emma. Have you guys come across any situation where you can monitor particulate matter pollution from either the nano or the microsatellites? Like PM2.5 or PM10?
Well, in the visual spectrum, we're pretty limited to what we can see. But we can see smokestacks. We've done video of smokestacks, and you can see some effects of air quality. But environmental monitoring in terms of air quality isn't our forte.
We aren't doing that now, but it is one of the things we're thinking of in the future. Spire doesn't build any payload. So we assemble the nanosatellites, but we typically buy the payload from a manufacturer. And from a nanosatellite base, we're pretty confident that we will be able to monitor anything on a radio frequency basis between 0.1 gigahertz and 50 gigahertz. Although the higher piece of the spectrum is not something we can do immediately. So give it 4, 5, 6 years, we will be able to think about visualizing or monitoring pollutants and
So can I just add to that? Were you thinking of the MISR instrument that NASA launched on Terra a few years ago?
I don't know the exact name, probably that's
Yeah, because I worked on that mission. So that looked specifically at aerosols in the Earth's atmosphere. And this was shortly after the Mount St. Helens explosion. So there was a lot of data out there. All of that stuff's still available online. So they basically had a push-through technology with multiple wavelengths, and they went and did sort of a column density analysis globally of aerosol particulates. And of course that data changes all the time, which brings in what she's talking about with regard to continual revisits. But there are some data sets that are publicly available out there.
I will pick it up. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rohit. Good to see some of you from yesterday's talks. So I wanted to understand from Vidushi, Emma, and Mark, that what are the biggest risks and challenges in terms of flight operations and launches for the next 5 years, or even now?
What are the biggest risks?
Biggest risks and challenges for flight operations and launches in general?
Well, okay, so I'll just give my picture. I am not an expert in flight operations, so I'll leave that to her. I think, in Singapore, one of the things people often ask me is, what if the rocket blows up? That's like one of the first questions I get. And the answer is, that would be bad. But the reality is, it just doesn't happen that often, and I think we really need to mitigate the perception of risk. We don't directly control the risk, but if you think about, say, ISRO and the PSLV, the number of successful launches they've had back-to-back, and they're making money off of that system at this point. So the risks are there, but I think the risks are not as high as people think. And when you do what these guys are doing, you build something small, and you're not throwing $800 million into it. If it doesn't work out, you can try a new technology and try something new again. And you guys actually had an instrument that sort of didn't work, but then they were able to launch it again a short while later. So that's my take.
Yeah, I think In terms of risk, one of the biggest risks is really trying to do it the way it's always been done and not being willing to kind of try something new. So when we launched our first satellite, like I said, we had a relatively young flight operations team, and we went and talked to experts at NASA and other places and got a lot of really good advice that if we had applied would have really held us back, and we would have built a system that wasn't scalable, that we couldn't do with students. So, you know, being willing to listen to that and kind of learn from that, but also willing to try new things. And I think a lot of the CubeSat programs are doing that and trying to implement kind of new flight operations practices that are more risky, but smart risky, where you're really evaluating that risk and then taking it consciously.
From a,
Well, I have something to add to this because actually 2 years ago, it was the second payload that we built. It actually, the rocket blew up during the takeoff, right? So it's actually, we were upset, but the learning process you go through in order to build a space-ready payload and try to piggyback in any other satellite, that's something that's some experience you keep to yourself, right? Of course, we suffer some delay on the data we want to get from. It wasn't in our plans, let's say, but it's not like, oh, guys, it's done. You know, this is something you have to go through and just get back in shape and develop.
So the drawback was that you guys had to wait for a certain number of periods.
Yeah, but that we were just only waiting on data sets, right?
Right,
Because
okay.
we already learned through the process, you know, how to go through vibrational tests, radiation tests, shock tests. So that's again something you keep to yourself and you use it later.
it's a statistics game, right?
Yeah.
Planes crash, but you get on a plane anyway, and you don't think about the probability of the plane crashing before, right? You just don't. You get in the car, accidents happen. Same thing. Rockets are, the way we look at it at Spire is, fortunately we haven't had an incident yet, but given that we're launching, you know, every couple of months, it is going to happen. It is a statistical certainty that some of our satellites are going to get blown up when a rocket explodes. And that's just it. Now, I agree with everything these guys have said. Purely from a business perspective, the impact is, financially, it doesn't have to be a huge impact because you can get the satellites insured for launch. Operation, so the financially it doesn't have to be a big issue unless you don't insure your satellites. But operationally, yeah, even though you might get the money back, if you're counting on a constellation of 10 satellites to generate cash, but 3 of them blow up at the launch, and so you have to wait X number of months or years before you can have more satellites up there, yes, it significantly delays your time to revenue. That is a risk that multi-satellite, nano-satellite, small satellite companies mitigate by having many satellites where, yeah, okay, so you have 2 or 3 less, but it's not a big deal.
All right, yeah, thank you guys.
Going down this side of the room.
My question is more for Dr. Shi. Yeah, so basically in Singapore, so I'd like to know what are some things that you see and vision for us as a space hub, what are some possibilities for us moving forward? You know, what are some connections that you made? What is the future hold? What do you look for?
Did you get that, Vidusha?
I did, yeah, so go ahead, you repeat it.
Just so, what does Singapore bring to the discussion, the conversation? What are the benefits that we have here in Singapore that we can sort of help and take and make us a space hub in the region?
Right. So, okay, so I moved to Singapore in 2014. We're starting our 3rd year here. And, you know, the first thing everybody talks about is everything works, right? So it's very easy to start a business here. It took me something like 10 minutes, mostly because I had to type in my credit card number. I mean, that's mind-blowing, right? And there's a huge level of math and science competency here. You can be just a high school graduate and have college-level understanding of tech, and I think that's a wonderful resource we have here. And the physical location that we're in, it's a 2-hour flight to so many different countries. I think my vision is to have us serve as an entrepreneurship hub. And then we can develop the technologies here and fairly easily take them offshore to actually scale them up. And I'm hoping that all the ideas that we already have in MedTech and IoT and all the other verticals that we've been talking about, that those can be transferred into space. And I think it's actually essential, because if we don't move in that direction and put those technologies out there, I don't think that Elon Musk and his friends are going to get where they need to get.
If any of that is listening and you're looking at from the other side of the world, you should really have to participate. Yeah. But what you should be hoping for, or what you're looking for in terms of collaborating with Singapore or
Something to add? Are you hiring?
Well, we're always on the lookout, but no, what I would say is that Singapore's space seems to be important to Singapore. EDB, there's a concerted effort within EDB to attract companies here. We came to Singapore because of a relationship with EDB, but not just because of that, but it really is a great place to be. There is a lot of talent, there's a lot of smart people. I would say that the biggest hurdle we have with developing further here in Singapore is, yes, there's a lot of talent, but by and large, generalizing over the population, talent is very relatively risk averse. And that, A, from a startup perspective, B, from a space startup perspective in particular, is difficult. There's some wonderfully cushy government jobs in which very smart people go to EDB and they go to DSTA and they go to all these places. They get paid well and they have a nice and stable job. And luring those people out of there to Spire, to Terabella, to small space startups is not an easy thing. So more willingness to take risks and to follow a passion, a dream, an interest versus the nice and cushy, job, no matter how good it is, would be, from Spire's perspective, very welcome in helping us further develop our operations here.
Pat, I can be controversial. Maybe your value proposition that you're offering people has to be more interesting.
Maybe.
To help them make that shift.
As much as I would like it to be, we are not quite DSTA.
Yeah. But I think that's right. It is not part of the thing, because people associate that with, particularly with manned flights, the risk obviously of loss of life is the thing that sort of naturally shocks and scares everybody. With unmanned rockets, satellites, the level of risk in that sense with the price, I think we somehow need to disassociate that, because I think it's a historical association with a connection to loss of life that may scare people.
And I think another thing is we have entrepreneurs here. We have people who are willing to take the risk already. So this is a great pool of talent that we can think about working with. Plus, I think with the younger generation, this is part of why we do the outreach at the Science Center, and we do it out there for families, because in Asia, we have a very family-oriented social structure. And if the parents come with the kids and the kids start playing with satellites, that sort of makes satellites more of a comfortable concept for the parents. So when the career decisions are made, we know it's not just an individual, it's actually a whole system. And what we're hoping is to just, get people on board just, individually and as a whole society.
Yeah. And I guess another, so there's de-risking is something, because I've part of my past life is in sustainability here in Singapore. What I've watched over the last 10 years is the way that Singapore, of course, focusing being water challenged, but the way to turn that challenge into actually IP as far as water management, the number of companies that are built up around water, being a hub for the region around water. I'm just wondering, what things do we need to put in place so that Singapore can become that hub? I mean, is anyone from EDB here? I know some. Oh, there you are. Thank you for volunteering. So, we love EDB and everything you're doing, and it's fantastic, and we're very thrilled that you're here. But can I put you perhaps on the spot and ask you, what are the things that you think that we from industry should be perhaps doing? What would you like us to be doing to help work with you and sort of build the industry?
Okay, so first of all, here is personal capacity.
Okay.
But we see space as a high potential development. Just like Mark said, it's potentially exponential. So if it does go exponential, we want to be on the right place in the curve. So what we're doing is trying to position ourselves correctly to that. There are various set collaborations that we're doing and we're doing with the various research institutions. If you are students and you have interest in research in space, I encourage you to talk to researchers and understand. On the other hand, entrepreneurs are something that we do need in Singapore. So you can see that a lot of the new development space is coming from new space, new technologies, and new industries. And we can attract companies here, but at the same time, we would like companies here to grow by themselves as well, the companies here to do themselves as well. So if you are an entrepreneur or contributing to the that's what we like to see forward, and that's what we like to try to do. And last of all, right, there is still the large traditional space industry. So all the traditional communication operators, Inmarsat, Intelsat, SEA, Intelsat, their operations here, they have large regional offices here, and if your interest is in a more stable kind of area, there are these types of things that are available from USL. So yeah, that's where we see. And one last point on water. On water, I think we have a very long-term research method forward because it's vital to our futures in water. In space, I guess, I'm still looking towards them on like, what exactly some of them doing. So that's
Yeah, no, I admit my bow is a little wide there, but I'm sort of just trying to sort of make. But the opportunity is there because people say, well, why should you be a centre of excellence for X industry? Well, why not? As Vidushi said, there's a lot, lots of talent here. There are lots of opportunities. The growth of this region, Singapore is seen as the leader in so many. It's an opportunity to grab. I mean, with the we're out at Block 79, appropriately named Launchpad. So that's where we should be seeing these activities happening. The opportunity is there because if we wait 5 years and somebody else grabs it, oh gee, why didn't we do that? The opportunity is there, and because it seems a bit risky, because it's not all so clear at the moment, as entrepreneurs, you all know that's when you want to dive in, when it's not easy. Once it's easy, game over. So the opportunity, I think, is there for so many. I think it sounds like because we've got the big companies, so whether it's Airbus or whether it's DSTA, whether it's ST, all these big companies are here doing stuff. I think in some ways perhaps there's a promotional effort, the communications lacking in some ways just to present this as a really great opportunity. I don't know, any other thoughts on that?
I think one of the biggest problems is the opaqueness of the funds and the grants that's available for advanced research in this kind of area. So compared to if you're doing something in machine learning or deep learning, you know which other companies or the organizations to tap into. But space, especially in Singapore, that's a massive, massive issue.
I think that's really good feedback. I mean, because as you know, with the government's release earlier this year, the 5-year plan of investing $19 billion over the next 5 years into research and innovation. I mean, it's extraordinary what's there, but you're right. How do you unlock some of those funds and what's applicable in this area?
Especially it's tougher in Asia. I mean, there's a much more clearer path in Europe with ESA and in US with NASA. But in Asia, it's just massively open.
Okay, I think that's really good feedback. And we can speak more on this later on, but just remember that the Singaporean interest in space is a bit more commercial and less on basic research. Right. So things that will come, the packages will slightly different because ESA and NASA, they spend massive amounts of taxpayer money, and that's another one.
Well, I mean, that's kind of interesting too, because that attracts, given the startup movement in Singapore is so strong, and the focus now is on commercialisation as opposed, actually we're seeing two tracks, we're going back into deep learning, getting away from B2C type apps, but at the same time the commercialisation of space. And as we've seen this afternoon, it's not like it's all out there so far away, it's happening here and now as you're just seeing these entrepreneurs doing. So I think it's a great opportunity.
But I would say that the space community in general, globally, is relatively small. I mean, yes, NASA's a giant, ESA's a giant, but if you compare, the space community to the medical community or the financial industry, it's relatively small. Now that you scale that down to Singapore, it's even smaller, right? I mean, you have a handful of small companies, and you have a handful of big companies, and you know all the big companies. They're all the Airbus, the Boeing, the SES, the Inmarsat, and there you have it. And then you have a couple of smaller ones, but you know a couple of people. You sort of, you look around, you talk to us, and then you want to find stuff from there. You'll have access to pretty much whatever there is, and it is growing. Right? There's more and more ideas.
So one of the things that we want to do is we want to start a monthly meetup for space entrepreneurs. And what we're hoping is that we get together over pizza and beer and talk about what's happened in the past month. Because just in the last week, for instance, we've had Elon Musk's announcement, Blue Origin did their rocket, and it's really hard for each of us to keep up. I mean, I could spend all day reading, and what I'm hoping is we all get together on a regular basis and we just share what we've been reading about and interact and come up with new ideas and start to build that community so that we all do exactly find each other and really get to know one another.
So just going pull up the old theme of LinkedIn. When I pitched that guy, it was the first time he'd ever got any kind of pitch on LinkedIn, perhaps because he himself doesn't work in the entrepreneurial area, so he doesn't get approached that often. There is, it's 5-10% hit rate for every mail you send, right? But another sector, moonshot, we're going after is the US military. Well, 2/3 of $1 trillion budget, right? It's a big colossus, just like NASA may seem for us small entrepreneurs. A long way, big colossus. But I remember one panel at a US military convention or whatever, and they said that we only know what we know, and we have our relationships with Lockheed and all these usual companies that we work with, but we only know what we know. So they like it when new startups reach out to them, because otherwise they're not gonna know about it.
Actually, on that note, I'm reminded by what she said that Elon Musk can't get to Mars on his own.
Right.
He needs a lot of people bringing a lot of good stuff. And they actually sort of the mining thing, and it sort of reminded me that the gold rush, there was actually a case of outsourcing. The miners in San Francisco actually shipped the laundry to China.
Laundry?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's taken a while to get back.
Oh, that's crazy, but they had no one to do this. So somehow somebody can find
Okay.
each.
I think this gentleman here had a question.
My question is, just now talking about exponential growth. So I was wondering whether any of the panel can see humans living in space. Either a space station or somewhere that's not on Earth in the next 50 years. And then what are the greatest technical challenges for getting us there?
Simple question. I'd like to take that.
Aren't the Chinese already talking about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Elon Musk is talking about it. So what are the greatest technical challenges you see? And do you think they have
The technical challenge, everything. Really, I mean, you think about it, none of this has been done before. Everything from supplies to human biology to just figuring out where you want to go. I mean, I don't know, we can all come up with 100 ideas right now. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's wide open, and since nobody has tried this before, I think any path we try to take is going to bring up thousands of questions. So that's part of why we're here today.
So I'll add to that. NASA is, eventually going to decommission the ISS, and they just opened up a request for proposals for commercial companies to propose what they would do with the ISS once we're no longer flying international astronauts to it. So already there's several companies that have submitted proposals for modules you could hook up to the ISS to use the resources that are there, kind of the leftovers once they're not being maintained anymore, and keep it going and keep it useful. And then the Chinese are building out their space station. They have plans for even the next 5 years. They started a long time ago getting ready to send their own space station up. Bigelow Aerospace just had their big expandable module up there, and they have had plans for a long time to get a commercial space station going. So it's not kind of a far out thing. There's a lot of companies that are and have been looking at space habitats, and I think going to Mars and learning how to live in space, it's not a far out thing. It's something we absolutely have to do if we want to survive as a species.
And you can look at, there's two ends of things. You know, there's a macro end, which is, if we're going to live on Mars, you can't breathe up there, so you have to create, you know, how do you get the things that you need to get up to Mars? Can it survive in that environment? How do you get the stuff there? How do you do all you need to do to live there? How do you communicate on Mars? I mean, how do you send email on Mars? How do you communicate back to Earth? What are the satellites? How many satellites? What do you have to put up in terms of new innovation so that radio waves can travel from the Earth to Mars and back? That's on the macro level. Everything has to be invented. On the micro level, and this is a little bit back to what Aitor was doing, there's so much in the nanotechnology space, in the small communication space that just hasn't been invented or that's being invented, right? Everything, we know what we know and what we can do, but there's so much more that the world can do and will do based on someone's idea, whether it's Elon Musk's or an intern or you or me or anybody in the room. So it's just anything that can be and will be invented.
And I guess a final thought, I think if you thought of a technology that would help humans go to Mars maybe 10 years ago, you might get a lot of funny looks. And it's kind of to Elon Musk's credit that it's not this far out thing anymore. You know, NASA's doing it. Elon Musk and SpaceX have kind of made it cool and popular, and they announced their Mars mission, and I think like 2 days later, Boeing said, we're going to get there first. So it's not this kind of far out thing. You can actually think of these ideas and technologies and not kind of get the side eye when you propose them. So it's a neat thing that's just happened in the last few years.
Matt Damon's already made it there, right?
Yeah, of course.
Hey, sorry, I have one hypothetical follow-on question to Mark. Given the communications question that you just raised, is it financially feasible to have a micro or a nano satellite to undercut the price of undersea cables?
Okay. Financially, I don't know. Technically, today, it's not feasible. Purely technically, forget about how much it costs. Technically, a nanosat, I don't know so much about the microsats the size of terabellas, but a nanosat won't be able to carry the communication equipment that you need to be able to do the type of communication I'm talking about. Purely because all your communication today goes through either a MEO or a GEO satellite, which is the size of a bus, with parabolic dishes that are 1 to 2 meters in size or larger.
Right.
You just can't put that size of a communication dish on a 3U CubeSat. It's not going to work for launch. It's not going to work because of power constraints. It's just not going to work. How that's going to evolve as technology evolves in 5, 10, 15 years, is that kind of antenna going to shrink to a size, a power consumption that can be put on a CubeSat? Possibly. I don't know, but if it does, we'll possibly carry it. And if it can be carried, then probably it can be done cheaper than a GEO satellite. But today, technically not feasible.
What about an inflatable?
Inflatable antenna.
I don't know. I mean,
I'm not a radio communications engineer. It's possible. I just don't know enough about it.
Because basically anything that's too expensive or too hard to do today or can't be done today, to our earlier comments, it's really, as you say, 5, 10 years time. Let's invent the technology. Let's dream. Let's make that happen. If the payload is big enough.
Well, people are working on optical communication right now rather than using radio waves. They're talking about using optical wavelengths to do this.
Right.
So I think people are already trying to go down that path. Yeah.
Are panelists allowed in this game, in the rules, to ask other panelists questions?
You may
Right.
indeed. But equally, each panelist has the right to refuse to answer your question.
So back to the water theme. Can your platform track tsunamis and freak waves? And does that be discussed internally?
So there are payloads that exist today that can calculate wave height. It is definitely something we're discussing. Whether it's something that can be carried by our satellites today, I don't know. So It's important to know that nanosatellites, CubeSats, whether 1U, 2U, 3U, are very much beholden to a power budget. When you have a satellite in space, larger satellites, I'm assuming Terra's has those that you can move around, carry fuel. Small satellites, like we operate, don't. So there's no fuel in our satellites, there's no propulsion, we can't move them around really well, and we depend entirely on two small solar panels. And as our satellites travel 90 minutes in the 45 minutes in the light and 45 minutes in the shadow, so we orbit the Earth once every 90 minutes roughly, we have 45 minutes to charge the satellite and 45 minutes to consume that charge based on solar panels. We have to be very mindful of the power draw that the various payloads have on the satellite, which is why we can't operate a payload that would consume too much power. Otherwise, if your battery's dead and flat, you can't communicate with your satellite anymore. So power management and power budget is very, very, very important. And as technology evolves, the same sensor, the same thing, will grow less and less power hungry as the years go by. And that will allow us to do more and more. But it does limit what we can do today.
For Spire and Terabit, what's the average lifespan of the nanosats that you guys use?
Well, for ours, we don't know yet. We've had the one that's been up there the longest is 3 years. We designed it for a life of 6 years, but it could potentially operate for much longer than that. We're really kind of radiation limited, so we use a lot of hardware that's not radiation hardened, and so our flash memory and our avionics are what we think will go first. But yeah, we don't know yet.
Ours could be up there for anywhere from 1 year to 5 years, depending on how high they are. But the way we look at our constellation is we're aiming to refresh the constellation every 2 years. So just about every time we change phones down here because the technology's evolved, we'll refresh the satellite constellation.
So then, so when they expire, you design it and they come back to
Yes.
the day.
Yes. Well, anything that's not in geostationary orbit will eventually come down.
Okay, so it's not going to get that busy up there, although it's.
It
it's
will
starting to
get,
quite busy.
but it's there's a lot of space up there.
Yeah.
And you would like that comment?
Yeah. Well, okay, one final, there you go, sir.
So now that the nanosatellites and microsatellites have become popular and everybody's designing satellites, so are there like enough launch vehicles? Because I read that there's a lot of back box saying that you need to wait for 2-3 years.
Good
and now
question.
you're saying that every 2 years you want to launch your constellation.
We're definitely launch limited right now. There's a lot of companies that are trying to address that. So NanoRacks on the ISS has been really successful at making it easy to get CubeSats launched. There's also companies like Rocket Lab that are they're New Zealand based and they're building carbon fiber 3D printed rockets that can launch one microsat at a time. So there, and there's a lot of companies doing kind of deployable hardware that you put on top of, so spaceflight, for example, has a ring you put on top of a SpaceX Falcon 9, and then a bunch of microsats or CubeSats can hook up to it. So there's a lot of people in that area, but it's still very much, I think, on the fence whether the business case closes for them. So it's definitely an area that we need more technology, more people trying to do stuff in order to meet the demand.
There's been a lot of money from Silicon Valley that's gone into new launch providers. Rocket Labs is one, Virgin Galactic is another, and there's a handful of them. From a nanosatellite perspective, yes, launches are limited, but you can travel to a lot of places as a secondary payload. So the same thing as if you hitchhike and you say, I want to go here, and somebody picks you up. And that's very helpful. And so we at Spire always try to maximize the number of launches that we have booked. And we are booked on roughly a launch every couple months, so 2.5 months over the next couple of years, just so we have the opportunity, we have the option of sending satellites up. But as more and more CubeSats or nanosats and microsats get launched, we will need more and more capacity. The 2, 3, 4 year constraint probably is applies more to large, like full-scale satellites, if you like, where oftentimes you have to wait for 2, 3 years before you actually have a launch site.
All right, so we keep talking about launch, so why can't you just build it in space and eject it up there? There are companies that are doing 3D printing in space right now, so the ISS is going to be eventually decommissioned from a government standpoint. Why can't you just build satellites up there and just launch them locally? That would be one way you could address this bottleneck.
Good point. Okay, so a couple of things to bring us to a close this afternoon. I think the issue we'll sort of won't go on to the workspace thing, but just allow people to have sort of casual networking. Are you okay with that?
Sure, yeah.
I think we've had a fascinating range of discussions, and you've raised a whole bunch of different opportunities. But I think a couple of key things. One, I think the meetup group is a great idea. Who'd like to be involved in the meetup group? That's fantastic. So that's number one. Number two, as I said, we're planning to do a hackathon in Q1 next year. Title and theme is not all organised, but obviously around opportunities in space. Who might be interested in participating in the hackathon? Oh, great! Even better. Sorry?
Some of the Spire engineers.
Well, indeed, it'd be great. Now, just to that point, any of you that came in that we don't have your email addresses or whatever, if you're sure that you're not on any of our databases, come see Derek or I, the guys in the black t-shirt, and then we can keep you informed, and then with Vidushi we'll get around to setting up the meetup group. But with that, I'd just like us all to thank our panelists for taking all these tough questions.